Maverick News presents The Rick Walker Show. Defrag your mind.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Maverick News Channel. Thank you, everyone, for joining me here again tonight. Good to have the Maverick family back together again. And hello to all the new folks out there, wherever you might be watching from in the world. I don't know where to begin. Everything seems equally important, and everything we're going to talk about ties together. But in many ways, I guess I should start by saying everything I'm seeing today feels like a recording, a repeat of history in some way. Not exactly an echo of history, warning us that history may repeat, perhaps. So let's start in my home country, Canada. Chris Daisy out on the streets today, doing a great job shooting video of a massive demonstration in the streets, anti-Israeli, pro-Palestine. And these protesters went straight to the office of Justin Trudeau. Listen to what the people were saying in the streets.
Large group of anti-Israel protesters in front of the Prime Minister's office. They are popping smoke now. Popping smoke. Here we are in front of the Prime Minister's office. It looks like this group is popping off smoke grenades now. We popping off smoke now too, or? That's fine? Smoke's fine? Holy jumping.
To be a champ, Zionism is the root cause of this.
The Prime Minister's office.
Justin Trudeau has failed Palestine. Justin Trudeau has failed the Middle East. He has failed the Arab nation. Shame! How many times do we need to show up in front of a terrorist office to let him know?
That is Justin Trudeau's office being called a terrorist.
We will not be silent and we will not stop protesting. Shame, shame, Trudeau. Shame, shame, Trudeau. Israel bombs Canada burn. Israel bombs Canada burn. How many kids have you killed today? How many kids have you killed today? Israel bombs Canada burn.
Holy.
Yeah. Holy. Justin Trudeau in just a little bit of trouble. Maybe a lot. A lot of emotion. And a lot of history. And there's a lot going on. I'm going to be honest, I didn't even want to do this tonight. I didn't even want to sit in this chair and talk about this stuff. But here I am. There you are. There they are. Protesting in the streets. What does that do? Well, it disrupts. It applies pressure. It focuses the public's attention on an issue in a simplistic way, in a way that uses cliches, which is effective messaging. They use chants, they use rhythm, they use music. That's the way politics works. And they take it straight to the front door of the prime minister. Does he have any power? Well, he's sending Canadian tax dollars overseas. The government is playing both sides in this, saying they'll take more Palestinian immigrants while still funding Israel. The U.S. sort of does the same thing. Trying to keep everybody happy when you really can't. By engaging with both sides. And then this week, we saw the United States veto the UN Security Council call for a ceasefire. Not that that would have been binding necessarily if it had been approved, but the U.S. vetoed it, taking heavy criticism for that from some. Justin Trudeau under fire. Man. And it's like anti-Semitism, anti-Jew rhetoric ramped up all over the place. You're seeing it everywhere now. You're seeing it on campuses. We had that congressional hearing this past week where you saw 4 presidents of major U.S. universities testify. It didn't go well. They were asked some very difficult questions relating to free speech, censorship, anti-Semitism on campus. What crosses the line? Is it hate speech when you hear the crowd chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free"? Which by many, what does it mean? It means they want to wipe Israel off the face of the planet. Wipe it off the map. So when they chant that, is that anti-Semitism? This is in many ways similar to the debate that always surrounds, should you let Nazis march in the streets carrying flags with a swastika on them? And we've seen that debate play out. And if you believe in free speech, you may disagree. You may even be repulsed by what some people say. But if you believe in free speech, a lot of people say you need to let that happen. And that it's only when those kinds of words are put into action that you respond with some sort of pushback. This is why these university professors this past week were tongue-tied at sometimes just responding with silence when pushed on questions relating to this expression of anti-Semitism through protests. Liz McGill from the University of Pennsylvania has resigned now as a result of that congressional hearing and her performance there. This is a report from the local ABC affiliate in Philadelphia, just from a few days ago when that congressional hearing was held, outlining, this will give you a feel if you missed it. This will help explain exactly what went down at that hearing and why it was so significant and why we are going to see more of this, why in the thumbnail on at least one of the on several of the channels tonight, the thumbnail says casualty of war. That is Liz McGill from the University of Pennsylvania. Here is the report.
On Penn's campus, Sharonda, Penn's president wasn't the only university leader called to testify today.
No, she wasn't. The presidents of Harvard, American, and MIT were all called to testify before the House Committee on Education and Workforce. Now, while some lawmakers kept their questions nonpartisan and calm, it didn't stay that way.
You said something earlier about anti-Semitism being symbolic of the larger society. Your university is a hotbed of it.
UPenn President Liz McGill facing criticism on Capitol Hill for what's happening on her campus.
Jewish students undoubtedly felt very uncomfortable following that.
I'm sure that's true, yes.
McGill was one of 4 university presidents called to answer questions about growing anti-Semitism on college campuses. In recent months, some UPenn donors have pulled funds and called for McGill's resignation, accusing her of not having a strong enough response against anti-Semitism. Some of that debate was sparked by a Palestinian literature festival in September. It included speakers who have a history of making anti-Semitic comments.
Did you have the power to stop this event?
I don't cancel or censor them in advance of their arrival to campus.
When she wasn't on the defense, McGill was touting UPenn's efforts, including an action plan against anti-Semitism, a new student group, and an acknowledgement that Muslim students have faced increases in hate too.
We will continue to deploy all the necessary resources to support any member of the community experiencing hate.
The director of UPenn Hillel, a Jewish campus organization, tells Action News, quote, addressing anti-Semitism will take a coordinated approach involving university administrators, government officials, leading Jewish organizations like Hillel, and the broader community. McGill also testified on the challenges of balancing student safety with free expression, saying UPenn will take comprehensive action to combat anti-Semitism.
I think it's important to call out anti-Semitism in a very visible and public way.
You are looking at another measure that UPenn has taken, increased security at its Hillel with the police officers there pretty much around the clock. Now, McGill testified also that the university is looking to add curriculum on anti-Semitism to its educational curriculum here at the University of Pennsylvania. We are live in University City. Taronda Thomas, Channel 6 Action News. Sarah?
Okay, so that was obviously not from today. That was a report the day of the hearings, or the hearing. And since then, there's been a lot of criticism leveled at these university presidents, including Liz McGill, who then shortly after posted this video in response. And I'm not sure how much this helped her, if at all, but here we go.
There was a moment during yesterday's congressional hearing on anti-Semitism when I was asked if a call for the genocide of Jewish people on our campus would violate our policies. In that moment, I was focused on our university's longstanding policies aligned with the US Constitution, which say that speech alone is not punishable. I was not focused on, but I should have been, the irrefutable fact that a call for genocide of Jewish people is a call for some of the most terrible violence human beings can perpetrate. It's evil, plain and simple. I want to be clear. A call for genocide of Jewish people is threatening, deeply so. It is intentionally meant to terrify a people who have been subjected to pogroms and hatred for centuries and were the victims of mass genocide in the Holocaust. In my view, it would be harassment or intimidation. For decades, under multiple Penn presidents and consistent with most universities, Penn's policies have been guided by the Constitution and the law. In today's world, where we are seeing signs of hate proliferating across our campus and our world in a way not seen in years, these policies need to be clarified and evaluated. Penn must initiate a serious and careful look at our policies, and Provost Jackson and I will immediately convene a process to do so. As president, I'm committed to a safe, secure, and supportive environment so all members of our community can thrive. We can and we will get this right.
Well, if getting it right means resigning, that's what happened in the end. So that's what we're looking at now today. Liz McGill has resigned from her post at the University of Pennsylvania. A casualty of war. There will be more. This issue, it's not going away, and it's nothing new. People need to understand that this is not something that's just in the 10-day news cycle or the 24-hour news cycle. This is something that has been around for a long time. We went through the good times for a while here in North America. But this stuff goes so far back. It isn't just about religion. It is about power. It is about money. It is about geopolitics. It's about geography. It's about the land. It's about literature that goes back as far as the mid-1800s, I would say. What you're seeing play out in the streets right now, the conflict, the rise in anti-Semitism, the pushback you're getting from the Arab world, ties into 9/11, ties into the US dollar as the world reserve currency, which ties into oil, which props the dollar up as the petrodollar, which ties into what happened in the Depression in the 1930s and World War II, and FDR taking the US off the gold standard, which opened the door to the New Deal and promises of social welfare, which has led to decades and decades and decades of deficit spending, money printing with no gold to back it up, resulting in inflation. And now they call it modern monetary theory, and it's just a new way of describing an old economic shell game or Ponzi scheme, as some would describe it, maybe. Money's not worth anything because it's just printed on paper. It's just paper. It's not really backed up by anything. Hitler in World War II prior to World War II, the way he built the economy up was he was sort of anti-capitalist, anti-Jew, anti-banker, anti-international banker, because Germany was being forced to pay reparations, and it was crippling the country. And so the monetary policies of the government that was in charge prior to Hitler, they were just printing money to pay debt, and it was resulting in massive inflation, devaluing all of the currency. It was impoverishing the people. And he turned things around, and he, not with gold, but he backed up the German currency with labor. I don't want to get too much into the economics of this here tonight, but that really in many ways is at the center of everything going on here. In addition to the land, it's about economics, because that's what ties the United States into all of this. Taking the US dollar off the gold standard, inflationary money printing, decade after decade after decade after decade. Then along comes the pandemic. Western governments respond with massive spending, massive printing of money. They take us into the socialist realm even deeper. Decide to try to transform the economy with a whole new approach, with things like the electrification of the auto industry and the greening of our economy. Not just a New Deal like FDR had for the people through socialism, but a green New Deal, resulting in huge, massive deficit spending using fiat currency, backed up with what? I would say labor and productivity, but really nothing. Why? Because we've outsourced so much of our productive capacity, our industrial capacity. We've sent it all overseas. So what are we supposed to back this currency up with? What are we supposed to ultimately pay for? How are we supposed to pay for all of the things we have when we're not producing very much? Our resources? Not when the environmental movement, which I would suggest to you is bought and paid for these days by foreign interests, probably right in the Middle East, that are forcing us to leave our oil in the ground while we ship oil to our shores from overseas, while we stand on top of an ocean of oil right beneath us. In the 72, Nixon ties the value of the US dollar to oil to try to prop it up with an agreement through Saudi Arabia, which forces other countries to buy US oil or buy their oil using US dollars, creating demand for the US dollar. The US in turn provides military protection. So what is it that really props up the dollar, really props up Western countries? Guns and bombs. And what is it that we really produce here more than anything else in such capacity and with such value that the economy is still standing? Arms, guns and bombs, jets, nuclear weapons, even nuclear energy, I suppose, that technology. And while all this is going on, like there's the people controlling all of this stuff, it's a different class of people. This is a class war. The inequality in income in the world right now is so pronounced. There's such a division that it is just mind-blowing. Some people have literally billions of dollars, and other people struggle to put a turkey dinner on the table this Christmas, and other people in some parts of the world literally have nothing. Thing I've noticed, I've had the privilege of rubbing elbows with some very, very rich people at times. I'm not one of them. The thing that strikes me about the really rich people is they're sort of eccentric. They really are. Because they don't live in the same world as us, man. They don't play by the same rules. And there's a hierarchy there as well. It's so shallow, the way that they live, a lot of them. They have to have it's not enough to have a Rolex. You have to have the right Rolex. I mean, it's okay to have a Rolex, but if you don't have the right one, well, but it's more than that. When you get into geopolitics, depending on where you're at on the ladder in the hierarchy of things, you can literally get away with murder. That's why I keep saying, when you want to talk about international politics, it's a bunch of gangsters. That's the way it is, because there is no rule of law internationally. The United States has been trying to act like, police, the world policeman for a long time. Britain, if you have a global empire, the British Empire, for a while you can exert control over other countries, and people talk about colonialism and blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, one nation state pitted against another nation state, they struggle for power. And when they are out in international waters, or when they clash, you can talk about the International Criminal Court all you want, but when they clash, there's no cop there. It's like, who's got the most guns? And when there's overlap, or dignitaries or kings or prime ministers or presidents visit other countries, or they come to the United States, they visit New York, they go to the UN, they have diplomatic immunity. How many people has that guy killed? How many people has that guy killed? Who woke up this morning and decided to bomb country X? They literally can get away with murder. Well, we march in the streets protesting. And you can talk about political ideology all you want. I'm a communist. I'm a conservative. I'm a this. I'm a that. I'm a socialist. I'm a whatever. Well, that guy woke up this morning and he was like not happy with what happened over there. So he called up his guy over at in this office, and he said, I want you to send some jets over there and bomb those bastards, and let me know what happens. And then pretend like we didn't do it. Blame it on the country we bombed. Tell them we'll do up a media thing and then make it look like they were asking for it. Or we'll say that they did it to themselves. Or we'll just deny doing it. Just pretend like it didn't happen. And also, there's this journalist guy who's been writing stuff about us that I don't like. So I want you to get 3 of your biggest goons from the police squad, go over, and he's going to come into an office soon. And we know he's coming in there later today. When he comes in, I want you to kill him. Yeah. I'm going for lunch now. Keep me informed. And when that happens, make sure there's no trace, right? So we can have plausible deniability. That's the way it works. That's what they do. Not so much in Western countries. Well, maybe. I don't know. See, definitely the way that it works in most countries around the world. Yeah. Countries that we are involved with, countries that, through necessity, we become entangled with for political reasons and national security reasons and, to trade, to get oil. Climate change. Yeah, right. How about we just stop buying the oil from there and use the oil we have here? And then we don't have to use the oil from over there. But no. Why do you think we don't pump the oil out of our own ground? Who funds these groups? Climate change. Oh! What a load. But not of oil. And the people playing these games are billionaires. Not like 100 grand. That's a lot of money, right? Not to them. Billions of dollars that they have. Billions, gabillions, and billions upon gabillions. How much is that guy worth? Oh, he's worth 40 billion. What's Donald Trump worth? He's actually just a small player, guys. I think he's worth about 2.4 billion at last accounting. Smart guy, though. And he knows the score because he moves in those circles with all those really rich people. Has for a long time. He knows who they are, knows how the system works, not just in the United States, but all around the world. That's why he's a player. Sometimes, I look at him and I think he's kind of eccentric too. No question about that. They're all eccentric. They all move in these circles. And that's why, they rub elbows. And who flew on the Lolita Express with Epstein and all of, they're all these people. It's like a club. We ain't in it. And it's not even funny. And I'm sitting here laughing and oh my God. And it is a privileged class and you ain't it. And I'm not it. They'll tell you that because maybe if you're white and you've got white privilege, nope, not us, not the folks out there working every day. You die, nobody cares except your family and your friends. But I mean, in the world stage, like how much media attention you gonna get if you croak? You might get a paragraph in the local paper in the obituaries. Man, if you're tied to royalty, suddenly everybody seems to care. If you're a journalist and you're from royalty, people care. Jamal Khashoggi. There's a guy. He was a journalist. Do you remember Jamal Khashoggi? Let me see here. Okay, Jamal Khashoggi. There, just bring up his Wikipedia page for you. Who is this guy? He was assassinated. Okay. There's a picture of him. There's his Wikipedia page. Everybody cared so much about this guy. How many journalists get killed every year? Lots. In war zones. Lots of them are imprisoned. You don't hear a whole lot about it. This journalist, though, everybody cared about this guy. A lot. Tons of media attention. Well, who was this guy? Why did everybody care so much about Jamal Khashoggi? Time magazine, I think they put him on the cover. I think they made him their journalist of the year or whatever it was. They recognized him at some point after his death. Everybody cared about this guy. Do you know why? Because he's from royalty. Oh, yeah. Jamal Khashoggi. And I'm not saying he's necessarily a bad guy. I'm just saying he's from a different class, man. And this is all connected to everything going on today. He was a Saudi journalist, dissident, author, columnist for Middle East Eye, The Washington Post, and a general manager and editor-in-chief of Al Arab News Channel, who was assassinated at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on 2nd of October 2018 by agents of the Saudi government at the behest of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Yeah. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Early life. Jamal Ahmad Khashoggi was born in Medina on the 13th of October, 1958, sorry. His grandfather was Mohammed Khashoggi. He was the nephew of Adnan Khashoggi and the first cousin of Dodi Fayed. Who is Adnan Khashoggi? My God. Follow the family tree. Adnan Khashoggi, arms dealer. Super rich guy. Khashoggi was born in Mecca, Adnan Khashoggi, born in Mecca to Muhammad Khashoggi, who was King Abdul Aziz Al Saudi's personal doctor, and Samia Ahmed, a Saudi woman of Syrian origin. Khashoggi's sister was author Samira Khashoggi, who married businessman Mohammed Al Fayed, who was the mother of Dodi Fayed. Yeah, they all travel, and they never stray far from each other. Another sister, Soher Khashoggi, is a well-known Arab novelist. Had two brothers, blah, 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 blah. So who was this guy? Business career. Khashoggi, he was a deal maker. He would bring people together from like Saudi Arabia or other Arab countries, Western contractors, military contractors, facilitate arms deals. He became implicated in the Iran-Contra deal when Reagan was president. Remember Oliver North and the hearings and all of that and the covert funding of the Contras? Maybe you don't remember. You should learn. This guy's making, his billions of dollars off of this. Well, he, sits on his yachts, flies around on his personal jets. This is the family. This is the Khashoggi family. See that there? That's their own version of a board game. And they own so much that they have enough properties that they made a board game that they used to give out to friends and family. And all the properties on there are properties that the family owns around the world. Not an entirely bad guy. There were some Jewish refugees at one point. I think a whole bunch of them, about 1,400, or maybe it was more. I don't remember the exact incident, but I remember he airlifted a bunch of people, Jewish people who were in trouble in he airlifted a bunch of them out. But he was also involved in a lot of other terrible things like directly involved in helping to organize and fund the top secret Operation Moses in 1984 to airlift to safety 14,000 Ethiopian Jews from Sudan to Israel during a famine caused by the Ethiopian Civil War. Right. He was implicated in the Iran-Contra affair. He was helping to finance it and I think sort of launder money, essentially, is what was going on. Because the Reagan administration was trying to do this sort of, covertly so that even the taxpayers wouldn't find out. Says here, Khashoggi was principal foreign agent of the United States and helped establish the supranational intelligence partnership known as the Safari Club. All kinds of stuff. I mean, just so deep into all of these different activities. In January 2003, Seymour Hersh reported in the New Yorker magazine that former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense Richard Pearl had a meeting with Khashoggi in Marseille in order to use him as a conduit between Trireme Partners, a private venture capital company of which he was one of three principals of the Saudi government. At the time, Pearl was chair of the Defense Policy Advisory Committee, a Defense Department advisory group which provided him with access to classified information and a position to influence defense policy. Khashoggi told Hersh that Pearl talked to him about the economic costs regarding, get this, a proposed invasion of Iraq. He said at the time, if there is no war, he told me, why is there a need for security? If there is a war, of course, billions of dollars will have to be spent. I'm just saying, different rules for different people. A lot of the charges that were brought against him were basically dismissed for various things, including the Iran-Contra stuff. He's one of the untouchables. He's passed away. The family's still active. But what about Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist? Well, he, especially in his earlier years, became a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. He, I would say, very pro-Arab, knew Osama bin Laden personally, met with him, interviewed him multiple times, saw him as a friend. But as he became older, his positions on international issues softened. He veered away from the more radical side of Islamism, of Islam. He at one point, I know he met with bin Laden and tried to convince bin Laden to give up on violence, to no avail. But because of what he was writing and his positions, and he was born in Saudi Arabia, so he became critical in some ways of the Saudi government. And the prince didn't like it, so he ordered the guy to be killed, and brutally. Right there, relationship with Osama bin Laden. See, they talk about it right here. And so he was murdered, assassinated, and you may recall the media lost its collective mind. Because why? He was just one guy, one journalist, one more dead journalist, right? Plenty of them out there. Plenty of journalists going against the grain. But this guy, he got all kinds of attention because he's part of international royalty. Saudi, well, not so much Saudi royalty, but an affront to became an affront to Saudi royalty. A threat as a journalist because he had a loud voice internationally. And he had deviated. He became sort of a dissident against violence. Still very sympathetic, though, to Arab perspectives I don't want to comment too much on what he might have had to say at this point about Israel or the Jewish people. But man, the media lost their minds when this guy was assassinated. And then the United States government, some good people in the intelligence services there, in the FBI, in what we would call the lettered agencies, areas of the deep state, they investigated this stuff and they were trying to hold some people accountable on this. And they did, eventually take steps to prevent some people who were involved in the assassination from coming back into the United States by revoking passports and things like that, or by not their passports, but preventing them from traveling to the US. But the prince, no, not touchable. Nothing's ever happened there. Even though the government in Saudi Arabia finally came out and basically admitted that the hit had been ordered, nothing happened to the prince, because you know why? Different class. Can't touch that guy. He can murder somebody. And nothing happens. Nothing happens. Not to somebody like that. And Donald Trump, political pragmatist. See, he, at the time, was receiving intelligence briefings on this very matter. And then he came out and made a statement saying that basically he didn't know if he was accused of lying about what the CIA had told him, what had really happened. See, because there's truth, and then when you're the president of the United States, and then there's, you got to say what you got to say in order to keep the peace, and in order to keep the money flowing, and in order to maintain stability domestically and internationally. And so he sized things up. And this is my assessment of it. He knows that guy's untouchable. It doesn't matter what U.S. law enforcement wants to do to the guy. They have no jurisdiction in Saudi Arabia. So when a Saudi prince decides to have somebody terminated, what are we supposed to do about it? Well, you can sanction them. You can tie. What are we supposed to do? Sever ties with Saudi Arabia? That ain't going to happen. The US dollar is tied to the value of oil. We're not being permitted to pump the oil out of our own ground because climate change. Just keep importing it then and burn the other guy's oil. Their oil's clean, I guess. Our oil's dirty, whatever. But Trump knows you couldn't just sever ties with Saudi Arabia. Could you imagine what would have happened to the economy? What would have happened geopolitically if the United States just severed ties with Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia needs the United States as well, because they've got Iran sitting there just chomping at the bit to come in and exert their influence there. They'd like to basically take that place over. So the United States protects them. But there's a high level of resentment there, obviously. You can see it in the relationship. And Saudi Arabia also knows that the United States, as much as they have all the guns and the bombs, look at the Saudi royal family knows that the United States needs Saudi Arabia, probably at this point more than Saudi Arabia needs the United States. So again, you have the tail wagging the dog. You want to talk about 9/11? That's kind of almost a taboo subject, right? If you really want to dig down and get into the truth of the matter. Now, I believe, and I'm certain that Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind it, and he's the guy who pulled the trigger on that. He's claimed responsibility for it multiple times. He's just look at the letter to America from Osama bin Laden. But this past week, who spoke about it in blatant terms? The naked, uncomfortable truth. Vivek Ramaswamy at the GOP debate. Oh, baby, did he talk about 9/11 and J6 and all of these things and just laid it right out on the table? This is a guy who kind of gets it, I think, right? But he ain't white. So the rules that apply to somebody like me don't apply to somebody like him. And he was pretty fearless. I think he's in it to win it. And when I say in it to win it, I think he wants to be Trump's running mate. And if Trump doesn't make it all the way to the candidacy, then I think he wants to be the candidate. And I think he's dead serious about this. After seeing what he did during this debate this past week, oh yeah, because he took some real risks here, talking about all of these things, was accused later after the debate in the mainstream media of promoting conspiracy theories. But man, he was like on fire and hitting every high note perfectly and in just the right way with just the right degree of finesse, crafting his narrative very carefully in such a way that I think he was dealing with actual facts, not veering off into the conspiracy theory weeds, but at the same time scoring huge, big points. And playing politics with extreme skill. Here's what he had to say about J6 and 9/11 and Trump. This is the naked truth, man. And this all ties back in. You keep what I just told you all about Jamal Khashoggi and Adnan Khashoggi and the arms dealing and the huge money and the influence. And he lays it out here, baby.
With all three of my other colleagues on this debate stage is all three of them have been licking Donald Trump's boots for years for money and endorsements. Ron DeSantis, you've been a great governor, but you would have never been one without actually begging Donald Trump for that endorsement.
And you attacked him in your book a year ago.
Same thing with Chris Christie as a lobbyist, begging them for COVID money for his special interests in New Jersey, prepping him for the debates last time around. These people are now Monday morning quarterbacking some decision he made. I think the real enemy is not Donald Trump. It's not even Joe Biden. It is the deep state that at least Donald Trump attempted to take on. And if you want somebody who's going to speak truth to power, then vote for somebody who's going to speak the truth to you. Why am I the only person on the stage, at least, who can say that January 6th now does look like it was an inside job, that the government lied to us for 20 years about Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11, that the Great Replacement theory is not some grand right-wing conspiracy theory, but a basic statement of the Democratic Party's platform, that the 2020 election was indeed stolen by big tech, that the 2016 election, the one that Trump won for sure, was also one that was stolen from him by the national security establishment that actually put up the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that they knew was false. There's a reason why I'm the only person on the stage who can say these things. That's what it's going to take, not people who are licking his boots one time and now Monday morning quarterbacking and criticizing him when it's convenient.
Governor Christie.
Wow. He just said it. He just came right out and said it. Are you getting it? It's like they've got all the money. And it isn't just the Jews. Okay, that's the game, right? That's the game. That's the propaganda. This is the age-old story. Oh, the Jews, they control all the banks, and they control the media, and they control the pharmaceutical industry, and they control everything, and it's all the Jews' fault. Is it? Yeah, right. Scapegoat. What did I show everybody this past week? Bunch of world leaders off to the COP28 climate change summit. Where? Dubai. Land of the well-heeled. You think Vegas is Sin City? Ooh. Dubai is Vegas on steroids. Playground for the ultra-rich. And they all went there. Why Dubai for climate change? A synthetic city in the middle of the desert. Everything there is fake. Every inch of it. Every square inch. It's fake. You ever been to Vegas? That place is fake, fake, fake. It's in the desert too. Glitzy. I love the place just because I like to look at the flashing lights and I like to look at the giant fake pyramid. It's fake, man. It's a playground. It's a circus. So to save the planet, they all fly off in their jets to the desert, to a fake city full of fake buildings, fake everything, synthetic, and yet oh so real because they have so much money and so much power. And this is not Israel. This is not, Jew Central. No. This is Arab Central, man. This is totally different. And then we saw Kevin O'Leary, Canadian citizen, but sort of an international citizen. We'll put it that way. And he's not even like a major player. That guy is only worth like maybe between $500 million and $1 billion. So he's got lots of coin. A smart guy. A lot of ways I really like him. But a lot, what he posted this past week was so revealing. He was there getting stem cell therapy in a clinic, which costs anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000. Made a promo video, posted that online, and then at the end he says, "I'm a vampire." I don't know if he realized how. I don't know if you saw the irony in that, but yeah, the elites, right? Different world for the rich. By the way, did you check the price of a turkey this Christmas? There's a guy, Kevin O'Leary, who ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada at one point and was the front runner for a while until he dropped out. And I like a lot of what he says about the economy, and he makes a lot of sense to me in a lot of different ways. But like I said, I've traveled in circles where I've been able to meet a lot of rich people in my travels, and a lot of them are pretty eccentric because they don't live like us. But I'd say Kevin O'Leary is almost like the new middle class among the well-heeled, the elite. If you're looking for people to blame, don't look for a cliche. Just look for the money and the power. Khashoggi. And when you come from those lines, right? People care. So when you're a Khashoggi and you get assassinated, suddenly people care. And it becomes an international story. The ramifications resonate. Now, he's still just one journalist, one guy. Trump being the political realist, I would say that he is, understood that there was no way that justice would end up being served on that. Biden, same thing. Not going to do anything about it. Couldn't even get a handshake when he went to Saudi Arabia. Got a fist bump instead, or some silly thing. No respect. Because the tail is a wagging the dog. Why? Fiat currency. Lies being told to us. What kind of lie? A lie of financial security that they've been able to, kind of keep it going since the 30s. But the bill is coming due. You think you got a pension coming? No, I don't know. Looking kind of dicey right now for all of us. Alberta, province of Alberta, looking at decoupling from the Canada Pension Plan. Why do you think? Because there might not be any money there in the end for us. The baby boomers, the greatest generation, those who fought in World War II, those who came just after that, the post-World War II baby boom, those people, like my parents, okay, they got their pensions. So they played the system out for that amount of time. But us, guys like me, I'm still a little ways off. Probably a lot of you are too. Do you think there's going to be money there? There ain't no gold to back it up. And the more I think about it, you go back to the roaring 20s. They still had the gold standard and the economy crashed. Why was that? Because the stock market created the artificial currency with people, short selling, doing all these crazy things and inflating the prices of stocks. And the United States, as productive as it was at that time, wasn't producing enough to pay the international debts when the market crashed and the value came out of the balloon. And what did FDR do? They didn't have enough gold. See? Creditors, like real creditors, international creditors and domestic too, but international creditors, they wanted their money. There was a run on the bank. You know what a run on the bank is? Watch It's a Wonderful Life. It's when everybody goes to the bank because there's a financial collapse of some kind and everybody runs and they all want their money out at the same time, but the bank doesn't actually have it. So the bank has to back it up with something. Well, what did they back it up with in It's a Wonderful Life? With real estate, the building and loan. The money was in the real estate. They had some cash reserves to facilitate deposits and withdrawals on a daily basis, but they couldn't just give everybody all their money. They'd have to liquidate the real estate holdings. Same thing when the country, you're dealing in international trade. You have to back up your currency with something. Well, back in the 20s, it was gold. But they only had a certain amount, like maybe, I don't know what the percentage was. 20%, 30%. So when the economy collapses and international creditors panic and they want their money, everybody was trying to sell off the stocks, right? Or give me my money. You owe me money. Didn't have enough. So what did FDR do? He forced everybody to turn in their gold. Turn in your gold, turn in your gold. We weren't alive at that time, right? I wasn't alive, but I know that that's what went on. And some people say, that's a violation of our rights. Well, turn it in anyway. He needed the gold because he had to pay off the creditors. And then after all of that they survived it and the economy was. He had a fiat currency on his hands. So what did he do? He said, New Deal for everybody. Now I have more flexibility in how I manage the economy. We're off the gold standard. That means he could just print money out of thin air. That was the birth, really, or the first use, I would say, and at the time of modern monetary theory, although they didn't call it that back then. It was like, we need money, just print it, and we'll just inflate. And then the strategy became, manage the inflation, only print so much. And what are you backing the currency up with? Well, really, it just comes down to trust and labor. But at the time, it was okay because the United States still had a lot of productive capacity. But a lot of other countries then also went off the gold standard and started to print fake money, fiat currency. Countries, all the Western countries started to do the same thing. But there was a lot of productive capacity in the West. But then we ended up with World War II. It was that hyperinflation facing Germany at the time that propelled the Nazis to power. The Depression, hyperinflation, high unemployment, and then Hitler was in the right place at the right time with his National Socialist Party, promised people socialism in much the same way, promised to give people back prosperity. And he didn't use the gold standard. He backed up the German currency with the productive capacity, with labor. That's what he was able to promise repayment with, was the labor of the people. And so, when these people say they're against capitalism, when they say that it's because you're being enslaved, that's really kind of what they mean. It means that, yeah, the government is going in debt and they are printing money on your back, on your productive capacity. They're betting that you're going to produce enough to pay off the national debts that they incur when they borrow money or make deals with other countries or even international banks or whatever. So they're betting on you. The problem here in the West now, though, is that our productive capacity has been exported, except for the arms industry and some natural resources. We still have some, but so much of it has been outsourced to places like China. What are we supposed to back everything up with? Everybody's on frickin' unemployment or social assistance. And now even the big companies, the corporations, they're all on the dole too. Now you've got corporate welfare. Everybody's got their hands out. So the government's throwing $1 billion over there and $20 billion there, and let's revitalize the economy. We'll just print more money. Well, you know what, folks? At some point, we got to pay for all of this stuff. And it's falling apart. What do you think these wars are really about? It's time to pay. And we've got major inflation. And the United States government is struggling to find a way to survive in the face of all of this financial turmoil that they have unleashed upon themselves and us and the international community. And Putin knows it. Xi knows it. All these other countries know it. That's why you've got the BRICS nations now. They see that the United States has become a nation in decline. And you know what it is? It's because our politicians have been making promises that they can only keep by printing more money, which is a lie because they just inflate the crap out of the economy. $15 an hour minimum wage for everybody. Yeah, you got it. And then within the year, we had more inflation, which ate all of that up, and you weren't any further ahead anyway. In fact, we were further behind. Because they weren't just giving you $15 an hour, they were handing out money to everybody else too, including big companies. And it can be okay, I guess, as long as you produce, but we need growth, and we're not getting it. Certainly not in Canada. We're not getting it from industrial capacity. We are not getting it from our natural resources because we're being forced to leave them in the ground. We're not allowed to chop trees down. We're not allowed to mine, you have coal mines. We can't do anything with any of our stuff. Hogtied. Still some, but not enough, and not enough growth to get us out of the debt. We'll never get out of debt at this rate, ever. We need massive growth, economic growth, not population growth. Well, we'll just fix the economy by bringing in another 1 million immigrants. No. No. Oh, no. Lie. Because initially, certainly in the early portions of that, the first number of years, that's a burden on the economy. That's not an asset unless you're bringing in skilled workers right off the hop and they can integrate into the economy immediately and become immediately productive. And we can't even put people into homes. We don't have enough capacity in our healthcare system for all the people. What a freaking mess. They're destroying it all. But I'll put it to you. We have nobody also to blame but ourselves. Because we believed it. Because we demanded it. We voted for it. We said, gimme. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? And we have so many people who have fallen into the trap of welfare that they become dependent on it. And we have so many people on this endless cycle of dependency. And now our foreign adversaries, they see that, they know it, they smell it, and they exploit it. How? Well, let's just send fentanyl in. Let's put everybody on a nice international IV drip of fentanyl and cocaine and weed and you name it. Let's dope them up and dumb them down, and we'll make the productive capacity of the West nothing. They'll all be droned and zoned out and sitting at home in their parents' basements watching Netflix and the internet, where we bombard them with psychological manipulative messaging, convincing them that their country isn't worth anything and they should hate it. Screw all that, man. Seriously. We need to get our act together here. Pull this whole country up by its bootstraps. Start working. Building. Again. Rebuilding. And stop falling for the lies and the traps. Last night, what did I talk about? Deception. Political activist groups, political opportunists. That organization, the power shift. Now the Canadian People's Union, they've rebranded themselves. They're a little bit more honest now about where they're going. They're communists. Asking everybody to sign their convention of consent so that they can act on behalf of Canadians collectively to restore your rights. No, the opposite. You sign that, you're giving your rights away to them. Like I said, and there was one point last night, and this is a very important point that I failed to mention. They claim that if they get 50% plus one at that point to sign their convention of consent, that then they basically take power, that they give the power back to the people. Basically, they're saying they can, I guess, form the government to compel the adoption of their policies when they get 50% plus one to sign their convention of consent. And that's a lie. Says who? To change the Constitution, there is a formula in place, and they say that they believe in the Constitution. I don't think so. They claim that they can make all these changes if they get all these people to sign this convention of consent because it isn't a petition. See, it's contract. And you're giving them your collective consent because they're collectivists, communists. They're just not being upfront about it, but it's a lie. They don't have any mandate. They don't have any authority. Even if they get 50% plus one people to sign their convention of consent, that doesn't mean squat. They don't have anybody elected to parliament. They don't have anybody within the system. Now, they can present that and they can make a compelling argument that they've got the support of the public at that point, I suppose. And they can put pressure on the government and they can lobby all they want. But there's nothing that is binding about any of that. So when they tell you otherwise, that is a lie. And that is how disrupted our country has become. And a lot of people believe them. What they're doing is, in my estimation, very dangerous. They're selling false hope to a point where the false hope actually can become revolutionary. Because they're going to have to back up their demand at some point. And they're betting that their mandate will come from all of those signatures, that their authority will come from all of those signatures, and they will be able to present a compelling public argument that will propel them to power. Don't count on it. Because there is a process in place to change the Constitution that involves that level of support from the Canadian people. They need over 50% of the people to support a constitutional change during the amendment process, as laid out in the Constitution. But you also need that to happen across 7 provinces. It also needs to be approved by Parliament and the Senate. And it has to be a process that is initiated by the government, not by an external party with no authority and no existing mandate from the people at all, through an electoral process. What they're creating, even though it is a contract, is also no more binding than a petition anyway. It's a very important point. They're misrepresenting the level of authority and what kind of mandate, which really won't exist at all. All they'll say is that we've got a lot of public support. That's all they can say at the end of it all, if they ever get to that point. But I digress. It's dangerous because when it gets to that point, if you have that many people signing a document like that in an environment like the one we are in right now, people can become very radicalized very quickly through an organization like that. And we've seen that in history, haven't we? What did I talk about last night with Hitler and the rise of Nazism in Germany? They started in the first year, they only had a total of 1,000 members of the National Socialist Party in Germany. But it didn't take them long to rally support. Hitler ended up in jail for a while, realized that overthrowing the government wasn't the answer. So he used the democratic system against itself, became a candidate, got himself elected, got the party elected. And once he was in there, he used the system against itself to basically end democracy and install himself as the sole supreme leader of Germany, the Führer. It can happen faster than anybody realizes. So it's part of a process, but don't think that for 1 minute that what they're telling you is the real truth. It is not. And I think it sickens me to sit and listen to these people when they sit there and say, Canada is nothing but a corporation. It's just a corporation. And, you know, you're entering into these contracts and they're tricking you. And then what do they want you to do? They want you to sign a contract to give away your rights while telling you they're going to restore your rights. It's a big fat lie. And if they want to come on this show, they're welcome, and we'll have this discussion. That's the way I see it. Not to say we don't have problems. We absolutely do, but that is not the answer. No. And anybody that's not being transparent, forthright, upfront, telling me exactly who they are and what they're about, if you're engaging in deception, then you are not for me. It doesn't matter. And that doesn't matter what political stripe you might wear. Okay? You better be freaking honest with me because I don't like it when people are deceptive. You can't trust them, obviously. And if they're lying and you can't trust them, then what good are they? No good. No damn good. It's turning into a internationally here, you know, in many respects. Again, this is what it's deteriorating to. It's the communists versus the fascists, I guess, or the far right, or however you want to describe it. And I would put them both on the authoritarian side of the political spectrum anyway, not this left-right thing. But this is what it's coming down to. Everybody's being forced to choose one radical side or another radical side of the same radical side. It all results in some sort of radicalism and extremism, and I'm not into that. And it's playing out internationally. In fact, in Ukraine, what are we seeing today? We're seeing a Soviet-era statue of a Red Army commander taken down in Kiev, or Kyiv. They used to call it Kiev. Now they call it Kyiv. Because, you know, on the one side, the Russians are saying they want to, there's grocery prices right up there in the top hand corner of the screen from the Real Canadian Superstore. So keep an eye. There's turkey. However much that is, we'll check that out. How much is turkey? Free when you spend $300 or more, you get a turkey. That is a great deal. So just go buy a couple weeks of groceries and get your free Christmas turkey at the Superstore. Now you know where you can go. Free ad for the Superstore. Didn't mean for that to happen. Soviet-era statue, Red Army commander, taken down to Kiev. Because why? Because they are trying to decommunize Ukraine while Russia is trying to denazify it. And what have we got? Hundreds of thousands of dead people. Enough said. And then if you go over to the Middle East right now, what do you have? You have Palestinians fighting with the Israeli army and civilians. And about almost 17,000, 18,000 dead Palestinians and 1,500 Israelis who were just butchered, civilians, unarmed, helpless. That's what started all of this on October 7th. Well, this round of it. And we're seeing leaders from the Arab world coming right out now and being open about it and saying that that incident on October 7th was planned, orchestrated, was done, executed under a veil of secrecy because they needed a catalyst, a trigger moment. I'm paraphrasing, but that is what this was intended to be. And that is what we have on our hands. And it is something that is escalating into a potential kinetic third world war. Beyond disturbing to me. Because people are being fed a steady diet of propaganda. And in people's heads right now. We have cliches bouncing around. And when I say cliches, I mean people, I think, especially the people who are taking this pro-Palestinian side, they have it in their heads that the Palestinians only have rocks. Okay? They're armed with rocks, and Israel has all these sophisticated weapons and a giant army, and they're just going in there and massacring civilians. And I think there are atrocities that have been committed on both sides. But if you think it's rocks and slingshots against tanks and fighter jets, think again, man. And Hamas, they're not fooling around. They not only have sophisticated weapons and the back end and a huge arsenal backed up with real financing from other countries, obviously, from what I'm about to show you. They have a sophisticated PR, information propaganda campaign going on too. Very effective. They're putting out videos that are so polished, so incredibly well produced. They just put out this one. Now you tell me, is this an organization based on what you're about to see here? After you watch this, you look at the level of production. Are they only armed with slingshots and rocks? Or are we looking at a conflict here that is about to escalate in a very serious way, in a way that will involve other countries? I'm going to put it to you that I think that's exactly what we're facing. We're in deep trouble. Those don't look like rocks to me. Did they look like rocks to you? God help us all.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, Donate. at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching. Maverick News. The world is watching.
So we spoke about Jamal Khashoggi, journalist, assassinated. Then on the other side, you have Gonzalo Lira. What the heck happened to him? Remember that journalist, Tucker Carlson, speaking about him in his most recent post, sitting in a Ukrainian jail. Interesting, that guy. Critical of Ukraine, of the West. Yet when he was arrested, not nearly as much concern, I would say, from the media circles and political activists that I might otherwise have expected to come to his defense. There were some questions about it initially when he was first arrested, taken into custody. And then it was like, no, I don't think so. Maybe not too worried about that guy. But now tonight, Tucker Carlson raising awareness of the current status of Gonzalo Lira again. He's in his post here, he says, Gonzalo Lira is an American citizen who's been, in his words, tortured in a Ukrainian prison since July for the crime of criticizing Zelensky. Biden officials approve of this, according to Tucker Carlson, because they'd like to apply the same standard here. The media agree. Here's a statement from Gonzalo Lira's father. So let's bring this up. Here we go. Let's play this clip from Tucker Carlson.
In February of 2022, the Russian military rolled across the border of eastern Ukraine. And then for the next year and a half, the American media and political establishment spent, what's fair to say, a disproportionate amount of time talking about Ukraine and America's obligation to support Ukraine, pay for Ukraine's military and its government, and of course support it morally, and above all, to hate Russia. And most Americans obeyed. Politicians wore Ukrainian flags on their lapels. American citizens put Ukrainian flags on their mailboxes and on their bumper stickers. But one thing most Americans didn't get a lot of was actual news from Ukraine. What was it like to live there? What was happening inside that country that we were supporting and paying for? Well, you couldn't really know because there's virtually no coverage of it. But on social media, there were a few people reporting in what seemed like a pretty honest way from within Ukraine. And one of them was an American citizen called Gonzalo Lira. He lived in Ukraine for quite some time, and he posted, particularly on Twitter, his accounts of what life was like there and his view of how the war was going. And so for people who are interested in what was happening, he was worth watching. Here's one of his reports.
The Russian economy is sailing on, sailing on. European economy, people are starting to die of hypothermia in the UK. because they don't have access to the cheap energy of Russia from before. See? And so everything that the West has thrown at the Russians has boomeranged right back at them. And so now they're panicking and they're trying to figure out a way out of this situation. And they figure that if they throw more tanks, it'll help. It won't help. The Ukrainians, rather, they had like something like 2,000 tanks before the start of this conflict. You think a couple of hundred now is going to help? I mean, why are they asking them? Because those 2,000 tanks are gone. That's basic, you know? And so what, a couple of hundred, maybe 300 tanks, is that going to change the outcome of the conflict? No, it won't. The Russians are just going to destroy them. In the West, all of the propaganda has said that Zelensky is a hero, a Winston Churchill figure, and the Kiev regime are just angels and stuff like that. No, they're bloodthirsty murderers. The Kiev regime. I'm telling you right now.
So he made a couple of points. One, Russia is not losing the war with Ukraine. Russia is winning. Two, the Russian economy, despite the sanctions from the United States and Western Europe, and despite the war, has not been destroyed. The Russian economy is actually fine, and in some ways it's improving. It's becoming more independent, more commodities-based, and that's an advantage for a country with a lot of commodities like Russia. Meanwhile, the U.S. economy and U.S. military power has suffered as a result of the war. Now, Lira, to the extent that people responded to him in this country, in our media, was denounced as a Russian puppet and a liar and a propagandist. But in fact, now we can admit he was right. What you just heard was true, factually true. Russia is not losing the war in Ukraine. Russia is winning. Russia's economy is fine. Ours is not. So what happened in Gonzalo Lira? Well, for posting that video and others like it, he was arrested by the government of Ukraine, the one that we pay for, the supposed democracy that we support for moral reasons against the autocracy of Russia. He was arrested, and then he was let out, and then he tried to leave the country. He tried to leave Ukraine. Here's a video, his last video. This is Gonzalo Lira.
I will definitely be sent to a prison labor camp where I will most certainly die. And so I decided that the smart thing was take my chances in terms of getting across the border. Right now, I'm maybe 5 kilometers away from the border with Hungary. Over the last 2 days, I rode my bike just about 1,300 kilometers from Kharkov all the way here to the border. And my intention is to cross the border, get to Hungary, and in Hungary, I'm going to ask for political asylum. So either I will cross the border into Hungary in the next couple of hours, or I will be arrested again, and God knows what will happen to me.
He never made it. 5 miles from the Hungarian border, 5 kilometers rather, from the Hungarian border, he was arrested. Gonzalo Lira remains in prison tonight, a political prisoner in a country that we were told was free, a country whose government we are still paying for. The Biden State Department is uninterested in the fate of this American citizen. In fact, of course, they support his imprisonment, and no one in the national media seems interested in his fate whatsoever. So we thought it'd be worth speaking to his father, Gonzalo Lira Sr., who joins us now from Chile. Mr. Lira, thanks so much for joining us. Have you heard from your son? Do you know where he is? And do you know how he's doing?
Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you.
For the opportunity of saying what is going on with my son, Gonzalo. Today will mark the 7th full month that he's been arrested in Ukraine. He has not gone into trial. He's awaiting trial. He was appointed a court attorney that doesn't speak English. He's an Ukrainian attorney. Insofar as the U.S. Embassy, they haven't done a thing. Neither I nor his sister living in the USA, and I'm reading because I don't want to lose anything, neither I nor his sister living in the USA have been able to communicate with Gonzalo. He's incommunicado. The U.S. Embassy has not answered our inquiries. The embassy in Kyiv never offered a defense attorney. never visited him except for the first time, his court appointment last November 8th. The embassy has just burned out Gonzalo. An American citizen by birth is in jail because he was exercising his right of freedom of speech. His defense, as I said before, is in the hands of a court appointment Ukrainian attorney that doesn't speak any English. The USA government, with its silence in the face of this scandalous incident, suggests a degree of complicity, or at least tacit approval of Gonzalo's arrest, since nothing else convincingly explains the conspicuous lack of response. Let me just read further, if I may, Tucker.
I hope you will.
Gonzalo was arrested last year on April the 15th, Good Friday, till the next Friday, 22nd, for that full week, without any charges. He was simply detained. They stole all of his equipment. He couldn't continue working after he was released for at least 2-3 weeks, trying to obtain equipment to continue. His criticism of Zelensky's Nazi regime, supported by the US government, by Mr. Biden, who makes, he is making gargles, that we have to defend democracy. What democracy? Ukraine has never had democracy, let alone today with this man Zelensky. He's a well-known dictator. They were going to have elections, Tucker, and they canceled those elections. During the Vietnam War, there were elections in South Vietnam, in the middle of the war, Tucker, if you remember. I do remember. I lived those years in the USA. Let me say more. Last April 27th of this year, Gonzalo put on a web video, this time, and for the first time, Tucker, heavily criticizing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. 4 days later, the Zelensky police detains Gonzalo through that terrible, sinister Gestapo called SPU.
My thinking is that the Democratic Party establishment will try to get rid of Joe Biden and shoehorn in Kamala Harris. Because Kamala Harris, make no mistake about it, she's an idiot. I seriously believe that she has under 90 IQ points. She is so stupid.
Isn't it odd, Tucker, that 4 days later, after condemning Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Gonzalo is arrested? Why was he not detained earlier? When he was let go the previous year, May 22nd of last year, Gonzalo continued the same language, the same criticism against the war. He predicted from day one, practically, that Ukraine would never win a war against Russia. He also said, this is going to bleed the USA and the NATO countries, holding on for Ukraine to hold a battle with Russia, which will never be won, will never be, successful. Did the State Department, Tucker, give the green light to Zelensky to put my son in jail? This is something that it is unbelievable.
The obvious conclusion is if the U.S. government is approving and maybe even encouraging what happened to your son, a man being thrown into prison to die because he criticized the regime, if they're okay with that in Ukraine, why wouldn't they be okay with that in the United States?
I really don't understand. It just puzzles me. It just puzzles me also with the prompt defense of the reporter, the Wall Street Journal reporter that was detained in Russia. Well, he was really exchanging military secrets. And my goodness, the way they were defending this man, I don't even know if he's a U.S. citizen. But anyway, his name, I wrote it somewhere. Totally different to Gonzalo. No one from the U.S. Embassy is defending my son. He lived in the U.S. all of his life. He's a Dartmouth graduate. I mean, he lived in the USA. He has, published Counterparts, one of his, books. He's been writing also. He's a writer. And the US hasn't done anything. I cannot understand. If we're going to protect democracy in the world, let's start by taking out that puppet called Zelensky and let Congress in the USA, for crying out loud, once and for all, impeach this man. He cannot continue. The US is sliding down every day, Tucker. The Chinese are winning us. I mean, what kind of foreign policy are we getting into? The worst of it all is that either they don't know history, because there are a bunch of ignorance in the White House, or they don't know. I mean, Gorbachev with Bush Sr., with President George Bush Sr., Gorbachev proposed him. We are going to dissolve the Soviet Union as such, and with it, we'll dissolve the Warsaw Pact, which was our response to NATO. But give me assurance that the countries that today belong to the Soviet Union and will be independent countries will not go into NATO. Putin, the only thing was asking Tucker was not to have Ukraine enter the NATO alliance. He didn't want to be surrounded by NATO countries, just like John Kennedy didn't want the USA to have missiles, for crying out loud, in Cuba. Putin was doing the same. The big question is, what if Ukraine had complied of not going into NATO force, alliance? Nothing would have happened. There wouldn't have been a Russian invasion. Like you said before, the US is bleeding money, but it is costing a fortune. It's costing the military. It's costing more day by day. The whole population is getting involved now in the USA. There are constant protests now that we have the other problem with Israel. Where are we going to? When are we going to be the great nation we were? Or is it too late, Tucker? We have to change the government. This man cannot continue with this policy in the world. It's the wrong policy. The world is beginning to hate the USA because they see the USA and the sign is military weapons, war. Years back, the protector of the small countries, Tucker. I lived those years. Second World War, thank God for the USA. It was England's and Europe's savior. Well, what happened to that country? This that is happening to my son is a victim of this Biden government and his relation with that puppet Zelensky. Zelensky is a man that has made opponents, political opponents, disappear. Gonzalo published 2 years ago a list, I think it was 12 or 13 individuals that had disappeared. They were tortured and then, killed. And Gonzalo said, if I'm off the air for more than 24 hours, add me on the list. He's a brave man, telling the truth all along. From day one, he predicted what would happen, that Ukraine would never win a war with Russia, and that the USA and NATO countries would bleed with armaments. I mean, would support them to So kingdom come. But what is the cost now? 115 billion is what I heard, at least the USA giving Ukraine. Can you imagine 115 billion in education, in health, in the USA? We have poverty. We have a high percentage of poverty, Tucker. We didn't have homeless in my years. The best years, in my view, 50s, 60s, and the beginning of the 70s. I lived those years, the 60s. So America was a fantastic country. I want the USA to come back to be the savior of the world, to be the grandfather that helps, that is constantly watching out. Not the one who's making wars around the world, supporting dictators, cheap people like Zelensky. This is the worst, Tucker, believe me. I've read a lot about what's going on. I see bloggers like my son, the George Galloways, Christophorus. There's a whole bunch, Duran. I read, I get involved, and I've seen that we're going down. We are having terrible policies in the USA, and this cannot continue. I want you, please, Tucker, you're a man that is heard in the USA. That is power. Information is power. You have it. Make something out of this, please. As a 80-year-old father who's really fighting for his 56-year-old son, help me. Give me a hand.
Well, I think you're helping him by what you just said, Mr. Lira, and I'm grateful to hear it, and I'm confident that when people step back and listen to what you're saying without emotion, they'll see that we've made a terrible mistake, and we're really hoping that your son is out soon, and I hope that you will keep us informed about what the State Department does. I hope this pushes them. Thank you.
So we shared it here. And now, Maverick family, you can share this video out there. Because information is power, and you have the power now.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
The New World Order. Government overreach. The Great Reset. Mainstream media lies. Now more than ever, independent voices are needed. Donate now at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. Maverick News. The antivirus program for your mind.
Okay, so with all of that going on, the United States has approved emergency arms sales to Israel. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said earlier today that he has discussed efforts to meet Gaza's humanitarian needs, as he described it, with Arab leaders hours after the U.S. vetoed that United Nations Security Council resolution, which called for an immediate ceasefire So what are we looking at here? We have, what's the total amount of money? I think it was 100 million in additional aid, all of it for weapons, if indeed that's what you call humanitarian aid. Depends on how you look at it, I suppose. Also, a group of foreign ministers from the Palestinian Authority, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey met today with Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So this was sort of a low-key, quiet, if you will, meeting, which focused on ways that different countries could help efforts to secure peace for Palestinians and Israelis in that conflict. So this group is called the Arab Islamic Extraordinary Summit. And the meeting was hosted by Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister. And the group normally includes Jordan, but Joly's office says representatives from that country needed to send its foreign minister on a different mission or trip. So they were not present for this meeting today. Of course, we don't know exactly what was everything that was discussed in there because, as I say, it was sort of low key. But here you are with a government that is funding both sides and taking in Palestinians as immigrants, while at the same time helping to facilitate defense and or even offense on the other side with funding. I don't know. As a result, you end up with a giant crowd of protesters at the Prime Minister's office today, pro-Palestinian, calling the Prime Minister a terrorist. So that's how effective the foreign policy of the Canadian federal government has been so far. All of that while we deal with this. Remember that house explosion in Arlington just days ago? Might not have been a house explosion. If you look at the video closely, and there has been more analysis of this, I guess, just by people online, bloggers and so on. Here's an example of what we're talking about. It looks like there was a car next to the house. Now there's speculation that maybe it was the car that blew up and then resulted in all the damage to the house. Just watch this edit. Well, it's not so much an edit, it's cropped in. And look what happens. Look over to the left-hand side of the screen. That was James Yu is the guy's name who was supposed to be inside the house. Anyway, watch. It's frozen. See, there's like a flash right there first. That's a freeze frame beside the house. Is that authentic? So is that an explosion outside the building, a car blowing up and then damaging the house after that flash frame? Or is that an explosion coming from the house external? It looks to me like something outside the house blowing up first. Okay, hang on. Let's take a look at the original video. Now, this is the clip that we ran the day that it happened. So compare what we just saw there to this first original clip. And look at that Porsche, that place right beside the house to the, well, you'd be your left-hand side, right beside the house. Here we go. A lot of weird stuff surrounding this story. Police say they were there to execute a search warrant after hearing reports of shots fired. Watch again. Let's see if we can slow it down. 0.25. Again, we'll slow it down here. Look at that. See that? Look at that. Where is the explosion? That appears to be outside to me. And that is the original clip as we presented it the first night. Look. The flames, the explosion reaching all the way back to those trees. And then the force of that blowing into the house, it appears. And the house blown away. And the main suspect, we know, had been posting online a lot of things about 9/11, various, I guess, some would call them conspiracy theories. Apparently, the suspect, according to authorities, was inside the house, had been firing a flare gun. They assumed that it was Mr. Yu who was inside who died. They found remains inside, but we don't really know exactly what happened. He's presumed dead, and yet there was someone posting online using his name, whether it was him or someone else, we don't know, who days after continued to post, saying that he wasn't dead, just throwing more doubt on everything. Don't know. All I'm saying is it's weird. And that home, only about 4 miles from the White House. Weird. Who knows what we will learn in the days, weeks, months, years ahead? Don't know. But we're still looking. If I hear anything else, I'll let you know. If you hear anything, you message me. All this is so strange. And, there's so much history surrounding all this. And we just heard Gonzalo Lira's father saying he would like to get the country back, right? But, all this stuff, all this weirdness, it has its roots in our history way, way back. You want to know why Canada is in the shape that it's in right now? I've heard people on this very program say Justin Trudeau's a fascist. No. You look at the family, you look at the history, you look at Justin Trudeau. I would say he's an authoritarian with an affinity for communism. And today, online, we have Odessa Orowicz posting. And I've seen this before. This is actually old stuff. Very old stuff from like the 1950s, 1960s. This is an intelligence publication from March of 1968, alerting people at the time, trying to make them aware of the background of then soon-to-be Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin's alleged father. This is from a publication called the Canadian Intelligence Service. And it outlines everything about, well, not everything, but the history of Pierre Elliott Trudeau's political career and what propelled him to the prime ministership. It says here, Trudeau spearheading Fabian takeover. It says this article researched by former RCMP undercover agent Pat Walsh gives essential background information on the charismatic Mr. Trudeau being created by the mass media and propelled into the prime ministry. Below is a summary of his background, and on succeeding pages is documentation and elaboration. So, it says here in 1940, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was booted out of the Canadian Officer Training Corps during the war for lack of discipline. 41, associated with anti-war and Red-supported Bloc Populaire in undermining the war effort. In 1945, he enrolled at Harvard, spawning ground of leftist intellectuals. 1947, attended London School of Economics, told Norman Depew that Professor Harold Lasky, the Marxist, was the most stimulating and powerful influence he has encountered. That from a magazine article in November of 1966. 1950 was in Shanghai when the communists took over, and because a rabid admirer of Mao Zedong and his Red regime, it says here. 1951, back in Montreal, he launched the leftist publication Site Libre. Among the well-known Reds was collaborated it says Professor Raymond Boyer, convicted of Soviet espionage in the Gorzenko Casey, it's hard to read this, Stanley B. Ryerson, leading theoretician of the Communist Party and editor of the Marxist Review. Pierre Gelinas, Quebec director of agitation and propaganda. Anyway, it goes on, and it says he led the delegation of communists to the Moscow Economic Conference. In 1953, he was barred entry into the United States as an inadmissible person. Boy, how times have changed. 1955, he launched again, I can't see this very well, Rassemblement, a leftist United Front rally in Quebec, but the CCF, which was a political party of the time, far left wing, Socialist Party, refocused to join because it was too leftist. It says 1960, he led a communist delegation to Peking for Red Victory celebration. In 1961, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Social Purpose for Canada, the Socialist Handbook written by Marxist and NDP leaders, was published, containing a chapter by Mr. Trudeau in which he lauds Mao Zedong, urges socialists not to water down their socialism but to make its approach more flexible and to welcome federalism as a valuable tool which permits dynamic parties to plant socialist governments in certain provinces from which the seed of radicalism can slowly spread. Those are the words of Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 61. In 62, amidst protests, the millionaire leftist succeeded in gaining appointment as a professor at University of Montreal, which became a pro-Castro stronghold, it says here. Appointed to executive of Redline Canadian Peace Research Institute. 1963, campaigned with NDP against the Liberals, which he called idiots because they had decided to accept nuclear defense weapons. 1965, having decided to use the Liberal Party as an instrument to propel himself to political power, he and leftists, Jean Marchand and Gerard Pelletier, became liberals and were elected to Parliament, where they formed the New Guard of the Liberal Party. Yes, I remember references to that when I was a kid. 1966, appointed parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Pearson, Lester B. Pearson. 1967, named Minister of Justice, credited in communist press with intervening personally to resistance hippie rag Georgia Strait, which had been banned by Vancouver Mayor Campbell for obscenity, introduced bill to legalize abortion and homosexuality, spearheading drive to shift Canadian justice from scriptural to humanistic basis. 1968, moving behind fantastic press TV buildup towards leadership of the Liberal Party and Prime Ministry of Canada. Yeah. Soon to come, Trudeau mania, baby. Let me give all this background. We'll just fast forward here, excuse me, to the 1960s. It says, it's been said there's something wrong with a youngster who isn't a bit of a radical in his teens, but in his 20s, one looks for developing maturity and responsibility. Certainly at 40, we expect a man to be responsible for his actions. And so we come to the 60s and find Mr. Trudeau in 1960 leading a communist delegation to Peking for Red Victory celebrations. We find him also picked up by the U.S. Coast Guard off Key West as he tries to row to Cuba in a canoe and deported back to Canada. I didn't know he did the canoe thing. That's new to me. I was aware of all of this stuff, but not that. See if there are any other nuggets in here. I didn't know Pierre Trudeau tried to row in a canoe from Florida to Cuba. In January 1958, a meeting of Fabian socialist intellectuals was called in Ottawa to devise a blueprint of socialist planning for Canada, financed by I can't read that, it's not clear. The Bogue Foundation? Okay. He tried to row in a canoe to, I guess you can make it. You got to be pretty brave or crazy. A trust left by British Columbia for socialist education. These leftist intellectuals named an editorial committee to write a book called Social Purpose for Canada. This book was to be the counterpart for the 60s of the earlier one published in the 30s by leftist intellectuals entitled Social Planning for Canada, which had been one of the Mein Kampfs of the early socialist CCF. Yeah. It was planned to launch in the early 60s a new Democratic Party, uniting the doctrine Socialist CCF Party with the merged trade unions of the Canadian Labour Congress. And Social Purpose for Canada was finally published in 1961, just in time for the birth of the new Democratic Party. And the editorial committee which produced it was made up of the following well-known socialists. You know, you read this history and then you look at where the NDP is today with Jagmeet Singh, and then you look at everything going on and you start to actually begin to understand why the NDP and how the NDP, as sort of a socialist party in the most recent years with these geopolitical realities that are upon us now, especially in the Middle East, and this realignment geopolitically of countries between these Arab nations and the BRICS nations, you begin to understand why they've kind of left the workers of Canada behind, how they've become something other than, you know, straight up pro-union, pro-worker, and a pro-worker party, and they've now rather put the embracement of international geopolitical politics front and center as their primary focus, I would say. And that conduit is, I would say, having a disproportionate influence over the way the Liberal Party of Canada is acting, behaving, and implementing policy today. This goes on. This just lays out Pierre Trudeau's direct links to communism, which are undeniable. I've always known that. I don't know why this is even a revelation or a surprise to anyone today. Well established, well known when I was younger. But as I've said many times, people vote for brands, not so much always for ideas or platforms or ideas. People don't pay close enough attention in the West to what politicians are selling them. And so if you really want power, you need to take control of a popular political brand or party and then rise to the surface there. And then you use the party as a tool to grab a hold of power. Here says the practical socialists. Now, Mr. Trudeau, it says, and his colleagues, Jean Marchand and Gerard Pelletier, are socialists. So are NDP members, socialists out of office. But the practical socialism is one in office where he can implement socialism. Just what I said. The label isn't important, but the policy is. And so in 1965, only 2 years after he supported the NDP and attacked the Liberals as idiots, Mr. Trudeau, together with practical socialist colleagues, joined the Liberal Party and used it as an instrument to catapult themselves into political office in Ottawa. Toronto Telegram columnist Lubat Zink put it in this way. Quote, the New Democrats now have 3 French Canadians in the Pearson ministry, Jean Marchand, Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, and Jean Chrétien. Not bad for a party which has so far failed to elect a single MP in Quebec under its own banner. Yeah. And Chrétien, of course, went on to become prime minister later himself, was for a time finance minister, also the minister in charge of the First Nations portfolio. The rise of Messieurs Trudeau, Marchand, and Pelletier since reaching Ottawa in 1965 is incredible. Pelletier is now parliamentary assistant to External Affairs Minister Paul Martin. I've met him, interviewed him, knew him. Marchand is Minister of Immigration and Trudeau is Minister of Justice, and reaching for the prime ministry, all in less than 3 years since conversion. And look at this. Isn't this interesting? Even then, Pierre Trudeau had a new concept of justice, it says. And we're getting a new justice system, a dual justice system implemented in Canada right now. He says here, Trudeau admirer Peter Newman, in his Toronto Star column of April 25th, 1967, said, he, Trudeau, is also concerned with other aspects of the creative use of law. Justice, he says, should be regarded more and more as a department planning for the society of tomorrow, not merely the government's legal advisor. We note here the concept of creative law and of a justice department concerned more and more with planning for the society of tomorrow. We detect here the concept of a justice department not primarily concerned with the upholding of law but with using law to change and shape the social order. Thus, does law become not a framework for order, but itself an instrument of revolution? Indeed. We detect here too, it says, the concept of a new basis of law, a basis of shifting sociological theory and social acceptability ethic. This concept demolishes the basis of Western civilization. That basis being a scriptural basis, a concept of men related and responsible to God for his life and actions, with his guide or law being not any man-made theory, but rather the commandments and exhortations of God's word. I've talked about that so much sitting in this chair. It is impossible to exaggerate the significance implicit in this shift away from the scriptural and over to the humanistic basis of Canadian law. And incredible is the failure of not only our political leaders, but also our religious leaders to speak out. Echoes from the past resonating today. And it is out of this new concept of justice that Mr. Trudeau has spawned his criminal code amendments, widening grounds for abortion and legalizing homosexuality. Last December 5th, he urged MPs not to mix the sacred and the profane, not to legislate ethical and moral convictions upon society. In short, divorce morality from law. But the British Chief Justice, Lord Denning, warned that without religion, there can be no morality, and without morality, there can be no law. Indeed. For what good is a rule of law if it is immoral? What good is a society if it is immoral? The Trudeau buildup is a frightening demonstration of the power of today's mass media to create and protect images and simulate, it's hard to read this, it's fuzzy, and to stimulate, rather, blind emotions. Unless liberals soon separate the man from the myth, their party will be the Fabian Express after April 6th. And so it was back in the 1960s. March 1968. And so it is today.
Exile. The Knights of Malta. Maverick News. Join us.
The world is watching.
And so it is today. But tomorrow is a new day. And I'll be back. Try to be here for 6 again. We got a late start tonight. If I'm not here at 6, I'll be here at 7. But I will be back. Because there is so much important work to be done as we continue to fight for freedom. Real freedom. Love you guys. Catch you on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.